My first question has to do with affordable housing. I saw your TV show last week and you mentioned that 40% of the population spends 50% of their income on rent. And can you explain that a little and mention how you think we can solve that problem?
Sure. So one of the biggest issues we have in Miami-Dade County is a lack of affordable housing. Right now, there are about 50,000 people who are waiting on the Miami-Dade County affordable housing list. But the county has spent the little money that they received from HUD in the last 5 years on workforce housing, which hasn't really taken off in Miami. So the figure of 40% of the people that live here pay more than 50% of what they earn monthly on rent or mortgage is something that should really scare people. It's something that the federal government is very concerned about, but we've had a lot of issues with the misuse of federal funds in Miami-Dade County. So about 4 months ago, the current mayor recommended that instead of paying a $2.7 million fine that was due to HUD for a misuse of federal funds, that we take it out of the money that we're going to receive for housing in 2017 and 2018. Which obviously I'm against. It only makes the matter worse. And one of the things that I'm seeing at the school board, and one of the reasons that I'm running for mayor of Miami-Dade County, is we're investing millions of dollars in the education of an entire generation that is leaving Miami-Dade County. The Knight Foundation did a survey when I first mentioned that, and they said, no, children are not leaving at 2021, but they're leaving at 25, at 26, when they're about tired of living with their parents. Children here in Miami-Dade County are a little bit different. They stay a little bit longer than in other areas, but what's interesting is that they're leaving to Tampa, to Jacksonville, to Orlando. Jacksonville right now is the #1 place to work in the state of Florida, and Forbes about a month ago came out with their list of most expensive places to live, and Miami actually beat out New York City, because if you take into account how much we make, versus how much it costs to live here, it's unsustainable. So I think that's our #1 priority. It definitely is mine. I was born and raised in Miami-Dade County. I want to ensure that the next generation has the option to live here. And unfortunately, that's not happening. There are a lot of companies that are opening up affordable housing. But that's the private sector, and they're just popping up like mushrooms everywhere. I just came from one that I think is a good model. It's one that incorporates Miami-Dade County. It has an educational component in the housing, because one of the issues that we have is such low pay. But I think that in order to do that, you have to change our economy, and that's a different conversation. But we do need to have a conversation about rent control. We need to have a conversation about finding specific affordable housing geared to careers that we want people to invest in. One of the things that we've talked about here at the school board is the possibility of affordable housing for our teachers, because they simply cannot live in certain areas of Miami-Dade County. And the tolls have only aggravated this, because there's a lot of people who have moved out, to the suburbs because it was cheaper. But now when you take into account the insurance, the tolls, and the gas, it's just as expensive as if you lived near the city of Miami.
So you mentioned this as one of your priorities. What are your other priorities if you were elected to the mayor?
To be the first woman mayor? The second one would have to be a radical shift in our economy. I think that the current mayor and the administration is erroneously spending our economic development money in tourist attractions. Miami-Dade County is so much more than a tourist trap, and we need to stop acting like a tourist trap. I've brought a lawsuit on a particular tourist attraction, which is supposed to get $9 million after they got the land from the city of Miami. The current mayor has spent about $70 million on tourist attractions. I was against the mega mall. Nothing against the mall itself, but I don't think that our economy benefits from any more low-wage jobs. In fact, we have a proliferation of low-wage jobs. You go anywhere in Miami and you'll see in stores that they're looking for work. So the current mayor says, a job is a job is a job. That's not true. A job is not a job. If a job does not give you the opportunity to live and work and play in Miami-Dade County, then we need to stop creating those. So what I've been talking about at the school board is coding, an investment in tech, providing new services. And could we use that land, for example, is going to be used as a mega mall for 3D printing? Should we have created a tech hub out there? The starting job for a computer coder is $50,000, $60,000, and that's without even a college degree. Very different from minimum wage at a mall. So we need to have a conversation about what industry can Miami have, what is our workforce aligned with, What services can we provide to Latin America? A broader conversation about, bilingual, jobs and how we can invest in those and use that as one of our key points. I'm also going to be talking about the possibility of Miami becoming a fashion hub. Long time ago, Miami used to create lower end clothes. I think that we can do a great job at higher end. New York has gotten very expensive. What is the garment district there is just out of control in terms of rents. We have a lot of designers here. We have a lot of opportunity here. Miami-Dade College is now going to be launching an incubator to do that. So I think that fashion is something that Miami could sell and could provide us with a lot of opportunities. And like that, there's several things. Our port is not open 24 hours. It should be. It's crazy that it's not. We need to have a conversation about our port infrastructure. How are we going to deal with Panamax and compete with Mariel? The airport, we need to diversify the airport also. The port and the airport are our two big economic generators. But overall, we need to have a conversation of, now that there are relations with Cuba, now that we're not going to be able to compete with Cuba in terms of tourism, what are we going to do? And the way that I pose it to people is, I think it's time that we grew up in Miami-Dade County. I think it's time that we stopped doing what we were doing in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, and we decided what we want to be when we grow up. And I hope that this campaign will get people thinking about that and what our future is going to look like in the next 10, 15, 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of Cuba, I wanted to ask you also, now that the United States reestablished the diplomatic relations, do you think that the Cuban immigration policy should be modified to adapt to it?
Yes, it definitely should. This doesn't make sense, right? So you can't take Cuba off the list of terrorist countries and then continue assuming that every Cuban, comes because of political reasons. We're seeing the rift that's creating here locally. Sadly, what's happening with the Cuban migrants is not something that's being discussed at a national level. We're discussing it here locally because 60,000 Cubans have come through Mexico, and we're all talking about it because most of them are ending up here. But I wish that Washington would really face this, because it juxtaposes this idea that everything is good in Cuba, right? So I think we need to be honest about a dramatic shift in our immigration policy. And my concern is that it's causing friction between the Cuban community and Haitians, the Cuban community and Venezuelans, the Cuban community and Argentinians, who have the same issues that right now are in Cuba, and they have to wait a very, very long time to go through this immigration process. So we definitely need to make a change. But until we make that change, we need the federal government to deal with this head on. And there's a few things that are happening in Tallahassee that could also impact us locally. And one of the complaints that I have about the current administration is, Carlos Jimenez will tell you that what's happening in Tallahassee is not his problem. What's happening in Washington is not his problem. Even on this Cuban migrant issue, his response has been, call 311. This is a federal issue. We can no longer have a mayor that doesn't engage in Tallahassee and Washington, because even though these are federal and state issues, the decisions that are made there impact us here in Miami-Dade County. And in the case of these Cuban migrants, if the federal government doesn't give us the funds, who pays for it are the residents of Miami-Dade County, from their education to their housing through the homeless trust, or the ones that pay the bill. So federal issues are local issues, state issues are local issues, and we need someone to be an advocate for what is the Miami-Dade County agenda in Tallahassee and in Washington.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of that, I wanted to ask you, how is Miami prepared for the 8,000 Cuban immigrants who are coming now?
We're not. I mean, if they came 8,000 at a time, we would be, because we could just declare a state of emergency and then, everything would kick in. We know how to deal with waves. The problem here is that we can't deal with a trickle. A trickle ends up becoming a burden for local government because it never gets big enough to have the federal government step in. So right now, the Homeless Trust is working with the federal government to get a little bit more funding, to place them. But again, we need a bigger allocation because we know exactly how many of them are in Costa Rica, and we know how many more are coming. And we need to have a conversation in Washington about changing the immigration policy. One thing that's interesting is when I've been talking about this in the press, people say send them back. There's no send them back. I mean, they have the right to be here. I worked hand in hand with the federal government when the Honduran children were crossing the border, and they gave us money later, in the process. But the reason there was that they weren't sure if all these Honduran children were going to stay in Miami-Dade. In the case of the Cuban migrants, the minute they crossed the Mexican border, a year and a day started to count for them, and they will be residents. And they will be citizens. And we need to be honest about that. The conversation about changing Cuban immigration policy, separate conversation that you need to take to Washington. And I think that the mayor should engage in that conversation. But till then, the law is the law. And people need to understand that it can't be applied retroactively.
Going back to a letter that I saw, A Thirst for Change in 2016. You raised the following question: why does a county with a budget of more than $6 billion provide inferior services, worse even than in some third world countries? I was wondering what you mean by that.
I'm speaking of transportation and also the services that we don't provide in our parks and in our libraries. I think it's shameful that Miami-Dade County has the funds that it has, and every time you look around, the response is there isn't enough money. Right now, one of the things that's being discussed at the County Commission is giving $45 million to the Museum of Science. Listen, I'm a huge advocate of the museums, but enough is enough. Miami-Dade County residents cannot continue to pay for private industry. The Museum of Science is a private institution that's going to be charging you and me and everybody else that goes. It was seen as a model for how the private sector does things better than the public sector. Now they've been unable to raise the money, and the immediate Miami-Dade County reaction is go get it, from county government. So they got the land for free from the city of Miami. They got $160 million from the residents of Miami-Dade County. Now they're short, and the response of the mayor is, let's take the $4 million that we were going to give them a year for 20 years, upfront it, and give them $45 million. But it's not $45 million. You have to bond that money out, which means that you and I and my kids and our grandkids will be paying $80 million because a private industry did not meet their promises. So how is it that we as taxpayers have to pay for everything that goes wrong in Miami-Dade County? We don't have enough police. Our traffic system is a disaster. There's no connectivity. There's no investment in infrastructure. You can't get from one end of Miami-Dade County to another. So I believe that we need to prioritize and stop lying to our residents. They lied to us with the half penny they've been using for maintenance instead of for infrastructure. And time again, our water bills continue to go up. Our sewer is still a disaster. I mean, there's people in Miami-Dade County who still get their water from a well, and have septic tanks, and it's interesting because when I talk to teenagers, they tell you, oh, I'm going, for spring break because I'm going to go build someone, a pipe because they're on septic tank. And I'm like, go to your neighbor who's on septic tank. Let's talk about the people in Miami-Dade County who are drinking well water, because those people exist here. We have so much poverty here, and we have so much lack of infrastructure, and we need to focus on that. There should be equity in terms of services all over Miami-Dade County, from water and sewer to police to transportation. You should be able to transgress from one point to another. And yes, there are places in the third world that are better organized in terms of doing that than Miami-Dade County. And I think that that's what we need to focus on. Enough with this corporate welfare. If the private industry is so fantastic, then they can figure it out, and we need to hold them accountable.
Mm-hmm. And now on the topic of education, some teachers have expressed concern because they feel that they have to give lots of priority to what's going to be on the state assessments. Right. What do you think can be done, or what is already being done, so that teachers can teach other subjects that are also important for their children's lives?
Yeah, look, our accountability standard, is a 20-year paradigm, right? And we've been trying to scale it back in so many ways. One of the things that I've been talking to our legislators about doing this year is giving us the option of going back to paper tests, just because the computer ones cause so much havoc. And especially for the little ones, we're spending more time teaching their testing their computer literacy than testing their knowledge of the material. And it's very frustrating for our teachers. But we have to change that in Tallahassee. One of the things that I've told our teachers that are sad about the fact that I'm leaving the school board and going to the county is that in the county we could have such a great partner. If you had somebody at the county who believed in education, the county's parks and after-school programs could do so much. One of the things that I'm talking about in my platform is, why doesn't Miami-Dade County provide programs the days that we have teacher work days? Look, the dynamic in Miami-Dade County has changed. People don't have grandparents taking care of children. We are raising a new generation of latchkey children. And when there's no school, there's nowhere for these kids to go. So we need to provide a safety net there. And who better to do it than the county's Parks and Recreation Department? The cities have been doing it, and they want to do more of it, but they need a bigger partner. So a lot of the things that unfortunately we don't have time to teach and to talk about, in our schools, we could do in our parks and in our community centers, in our after-school programs, in Saturday programs, because the reality is that there's very few people who can pick their children up at 1:30, and I'm not one of them. My children stay in after school until 6 o'clock, and I am the norm. So why not use that time and partner with the school district? Why not partner with the libraries so that we don't have a duplication of services? One of my frustrations with Miami-Dade County is that everything over there works in a silo. They've never really partnered with us in terms of using the same resources. So why are Miami-Dade County residents paying twice for everything when we could just work together and have one seamless system that sort of takes into account all these different things and allows our teachers to work in those after-school programs, to work in those, in those Saturday programs, and to ensure that there's a continuity of education, and very importantly, a focus on literacy and on getting homework done and ensuring that it's done before they go home.
Moving towards crime now, do you have a plan in mind to decrease the crime rates in Miami-Dade?
We need more police officers. This is not, rocket science. We need more police officers, and everybody knows that. Now, they're going to be graduating 3 classes at once and making a big to-do about it. But, in May, we actually have more police officers retiring than the ones that we've hired the entire year. So the reality is that the county needs to put more money towards police officers, and we need to have a long-term plan. You can't hire 300 police officers from one day to another. That's just impossible because of the way the background checks work, and also the training. And even the ones that are going to be sworn in a few weeks, it takes them a year riding along before they can even be on their own. So it's definitely an issue of manpower. One of the things that I want to do is I want to eliminate some of the things that take up resources that shouldn't be taking up resources. So one of them is eliminating Miami-Dade County's system for suspended licenses. You shouldn't get arrested for a suspended license. People shouldn't be put in jail for it. They shouldn't have their cars towed. Police officers shouldn't have to take these people there. A suspended license should be a civil citation, especially since right now, if you don't pay MDX, they suspend your license. If you don't pay a red light camera, they suspend your license. And the state doesn't even have to send you notification for it. So there's a lot of little issues like that you can eliminate and free up police time so that they're reporting the thefts, so that they actually have the time to investigate. Part of the problem that we have is that our police officers are not investigating crimes, and criminals know that. So they show up, they write it up so that you can call your insurance, but there's no follow-up there. And the reason there's no follow-up is because the message from the top has been just get the paper out, and move these cases, and we need to change that. So criminals need to understand that there's a consequence to crime, and we need to help our police officers and eliminate a lot of the other things that they're doing that really doesn't help our community.
I wanted to hear your opinion quickly on gun control. Do you believe that there should be a stronger restriction like the background checks, or should weapons, especially the assault rifles, be prohibited to civilians?
Right. So I have been a huge advocate of changing gun laws in the state of Florida. I have gotten a lot of flack for it. I've lobbied against allowing weapons in our schools and in our universities. We'll see what happens now in Tallahassee. I'm an attorney by background, but look, this has nothing to do with the Constitution. This does not impact people's ability to bear arms. All we're saying is convicted criminals shouldn't have weapons. People that have mental illnesses shouldn't have weapons. And if you're clearly buying a weapon for someone else, there should be an accountability for that. So yes, there needs to be regulations of the gun shows. Yes, there needs to be regulations of who and how you buy a weapon in Miami-Dade County. We're not trying to limit people's ability from buying weapons. We're just saying that there's a process, and that process should be a transparent one. And we need to focus on mental health and giving people the services resources that they need, and talking to children and adults about how to properly deal with conflict. So yes, definitely we need to have those changes, and we need to have an advocate in Tallahassee that talks about that.
Mm-hmm. And now with regards to global warming, our biggest threats here are obviously flooding and climate change. What do you think we should be doing?
Well, this idea that this is not our problem is something that concerns me, right? So the current mayor says this is a problem for our grandchildren. No, it's actually a problem for us. And we need to work on it now. I was actually at a White House meeting on climate change yesterday, and we've been talking about what can government do right now. Obviously, we have to talk about our energy consumption. I think that there's a lot of things that we can do in terms of water and our use of water. Right now, we're not being efficient in our use of water. There's a lot we can do in terms of education and getting people to start changing their lifestyle. We have to look at our building codes. We have to look at our water and sewer. We have to look at our water treatment plants. I mean, we're already having saltwater intrusion in our aquifers. I mean, that gets back to the issue with why do people still have wells, right? And those concerns. Obviously, there's a lot of questions as to the expansion of Turkey Point, its viability. Can it sustain, a rising tide? But these are all things that other places like New Orleans have dealt with. We're not unique in this. I just think we need to hit the ground running with actual projects. I know that the county now has a committee, but this death by committee at some point, we have to start acting and start explaining to people the urgency of acting. And the example that I give people is, everybody now complains about traffic. Traffic is our tipping point. This didn't happen overnight. This started happening about 10 years ago, and nobody dealt with it. And it just continued, and it continued, and it continued until they got to a breaking point. In terms of sea level rise, we have to start dealing with this problem before, we're 2 feet in, and people need to understand that we need to start as soon as possible, seeing what we can do, working with the different cities to ensure that we have a comprehensive county-wide plan. I worked with HUD in 7 counties, 50 years, which is a plan that they have that also had some sea level rise recommendations. We're not in this alone. And we just have to sit down with our neighboring counties and start talking about what we can all do together to ensure that, we're not making it worse, but we're also prepared for whatever comes in the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Of course. And now about your career,
Sure.
would you like to continue serving locally, or are you also looking at state and federal levels?
Well, I'm running for Miami-Dade County Mayor, so yes, and if elected, I would hope that would be 8 years. That's probably as far into the future as I wanna look. I have a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old, and whenever anybody talks to me about Washington, I always mention that I don't have a problem flying in and flying back, but I would never take my kids away from Miami-Dade County. I was born and raised here, and I really want them to have the opportunity to say the same. So I'm not the type of person that would pick them up and take them to D.C. or take them to Tallahassee. And I am a single parent, so I don't have an option, because I know some politicians just leave them behind and go, but they would have to come with me. So no, that is not an option anytime soon. But I love our community, and I plan to serve it as long as they'll allow me to serve it. So after Miami-Dade County Mayor, we'll see what happens. Time will tell.
All right. And then, speaking of elections, of course, what message do you give to those citizens who decide not to vote?
Please vote. Listen, first of all, I don't think the election should be in August. One of the things that I think that we have to talk about is changing it. August is such a horrible time to have an election in Miami-Dade County. Half of our residents aren't even here, right? And then school starts and the craziness and the traffic. So I don't even think we should have August elections. One of the good things about this is that the mayor of Miami-Dade County is the head of the elections department. So I could actually do something about that, more than just complain about it, right? So that's number one. But what I'm asking people to do is, I know it's difficult to get to the ballot. It's difficult to get there on election day. So what I'm asking people to do is to vote by mail. I vote by mail. It's just so much easier. The county sends you a stamp now and everything. We've changed the rules. It's a lot safer. So it really is a way to ensure that your voice is counted. It's so important for people to participate in this election, whether they agree with me or not. Voter participation does set the course of so many things. It is the only way to hold elected officials accountable. It is the only way to drive an election. election. And it really is important, too, in terms of our influence in Tallahassee and Washington. Because when you have a community where only 10% of the people show up, the governor doesn't want to hear what your problems are. He's going to go to a place where 30% of the people show up and vote because he's thinking about his reelection, right? And the same thing happens at the national level too. So beyond just participating for the sake, of just participating, there also is the impact that it can have at the state and at the national level. It only takes a few minutes. So I would ask everyone to just order their absentee ballots. They could try it out now at the primary. And see how they feel about voting by mail. But it really is a great way to vote. And one of the things we have to talk about is if we got more people voting, we can change the way that we vote. Right now, Colorado sends everybody a ballot by mail, and they have a 70% return rate on those. Alaska obviously votes online, but there's so many different modalities. In Texas, you can vote, at a grocery store. I think that we should eliminate the precincts. You should be able to vote anywhere. It's very difficult for people to get back home and vote in time. But we can't have these conversations if only 10% is showing up. If 10% is showing up, then nothing's going to change. And that's why it's so important, specifically for young people to register to vote, to order their AB, and to make it a priority.
Mm-hmm. How can we encourage more women to participate in politics?
I try. Every time I meet amazing women, I try to convince them to run for office. And it's very disheartening for me because the first thing that women say is, well, but, I don't know if I could face a negative campaign. Because women really care about what people think. And this idea of being attacked in a blog or in a paper or on the radio is something that they can't get their head around. And one of the things that people always ask me is, well, don't you worry about what your children are going to think, when they Google your name? My response to that is I was raised by an amazing woman. And when my mother passed away, one of the greatest comforts was that I knew exactly what she stood for. I knew exactly what was important to her. I knew what she had dedicated her life to. And as a child, it's so wonderful to know what your parents' purpose was. And I try to tell women that, yes, we're mothers and yes, we're concerned about what people say to our children about us. I'm not going to say that it's easy. Sometimes it's challenging. But at the same time, my children know that I love what I do. They know exactly what I believe in, and I think that will be comforting to them one day, As parents, beyond taking care of our children, I think that we have an obligation to be examples of truly effectuated, actualized people. And if this is something that you love, you should do it, and you shouldn't fear the negative blowback. But it is challenging, and sadly, a lot of women believe that they should wait to be older, and a lot of women believe that they need some sort of support system, and they need like 10 people to agree that it's a good idea. The interesting dynamic here is a man gets up in the morning and putting on his pants, he'll decide I'm running for office. A woman will ask 100 people what they think. And that's the problem. That's why you don't see so many women in elected office. But I hope that will change. I hope that now women, especially young women, will see that you don't have to be of a certain age. You don't have to wait for your children to go to college to run for office, some craziness like that. Even when your kids are young, you could do this, and I did it, and it didn't hold me back. My situation was a little different because I never had privacy. So I was never giving it up. And I'm always very honest about that. As the child of an elected, I never really had that. And I know that for a lot of women, sort of giving up the privacy is the hard part. But I would challenge them to consider, yeah, you're giving up the privacy, but at the same time, you get to do so much. And you get to be involved in sculpting the future of the place where your children will live. And it really, as a parent, is so comforting to know that you are actively doing something to ensure that the place where they will live and where your grandchildren will live will be a wonderful place. And in the case of Miami-Dade County, I couldn't love this county more. You know, we have such amazing people here who on so many occasions have remade their lives once, twice, 3 times over, you know, and I want my children to appreciate that and to appreciate the history here. And the only way to do that is to be part of that and to ensure that people talk about that and people realize that this isn't just a tourist trap. This isn't just a place where people stop off, you know. This is our home, and there's certain things about this place that we love and that we cherish and that we should protect and that we should talk to people about. And I think we need more women in order to do that.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts.
Anytime, my pleasure.